right. Well, thank you all for joining us. I am excited to introduce you to our speaker for tonight. Karen Shapiro is a seasoned financial advisor with over 15 years of experience helping individuals, families, and small businesses align their financial goals with their values. With a background in environmental science, Karen brings a unique perspective to financial planning, specializing in sustainable and impact investing. Her work at Domini Impact Investments included leading ESG initiatives and brokering a landmark agreement between Kimberly-Clark and Greenpeace. Thank you so much for joining us, Karen.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. I'm talking about one of my favorite subjects, so excuse me if I start talking really fast, because that sometimes happens when I get really excited. I'm originally from New York, so that's also in my genes, but let me go ahead and get the presentation part started. So, I'm often asked, how did I transition from doing environmental research to financial planning? I hope that this next slide will explain that a bit. So it really started for me in the grocery store. I realized that I was voting with my purse when I shopped, from my decision to bring a reusable bag to evaluating products that I was going to buy for whether or not they had excessive packaging, to not buying a company's products because I didn't consider them to be good environmental stewards or social stewards. So I realized I'm already voting with my pocket. Why can't I do the same for my investments? And that's when I came upon sustainable investing. Now, there has been so many words and phrases and acronyms used for the term sustainable investing, but it's not a new area. There's a long and storied history going back to actually Quakers who refused to invest in companies that were manufacturing military weapons, to the time of the anti-apartheid movement, to not investing in companies doing business in South Africa, to then, go into companies that, not investing in companies that were so-called sin stocks, such as tobacco, firearms, etc. So while there's an alphabet soup of terms, I think the most important thing is to always understand how somebody is defining it. So I want to share with you my definition. My definition is that you're using relevant, some people might call it material, information that's typically not considered in the investment decision process, but actually using it to make an investment decision. So, for example, a traditional analyst who is evaluating a paper company isn't going to look where that company is sourcing its pulp from, be it from a sustainably managed forest or old growth forest, while a sustainable investing analyst would consider that. And no pun intended with the would, but, while a traditional analyst doesn't consider it relevant, to us it is, because the question is, are you sourcing from using materials that are going to be available in the future, since your product depends upon those products? So before I get into the how-to, I just want to address two common myths. There's more than the two, and if you have questions about any other myths, I'm happy to address them later. But the most common one is it can't be done because the information's not available. Well, tonight I'm going to show you that the information is available, and in fact, it can be done. The second one is that you sacrifice your returns. that your investments won't do as well. Years ago, you used to hear, well, instead, why don't you just, invest your money in tobacco companies and then donate the money to anti-tobacco campaigns? Kind of backwards there, if you ask me. But anyway, you don't have to do that. And this graph shows that you don't have to sacrifice returns. This is two indices that track companies going back to, actually, it was 2007. The light green line represents the returns of a global basket of companies in the developed and developing world. The dark green basket starts off with that same universe, but then excludes companies because they have low sustainability ratings. As you can see here, there's virtually no difference between the two. I mean, the dark green, the leaders, so-called ESG leaders, slightly outperformed over that time period, but for all intents and purposes, we can say it's the same. So now I want to talk about the how-to. And I'm going to be focusing tonight on mutual funds because these are the type of investments that you find in retirement plans or that people have in their own personal investments. It's easy if you hold stocks to just know what the company is. But because a mutual fund actually invests in a large range, potentially, it can be in the hundreds of companies, you can't just tell from the name what that fund is about. So the best tool and I highly recommend it, can be found at this website. It's As You Sow, a nonprofit group based in California. They have a tool called Invest Your Values. Now, as you can see, they collect information across 7 different issue areas. This last one I'm not going to touch upon. It's just they rate some company 401k plans. So I'm going to lump together fossil-free funds and deforestation-free funds because really deforestation is also about climate change. They collect information about gender equality, which is things like the gender balance in a workforce. Gun-free funds. Does a mutual fund have investments in gun manufacturers or the retailers that sell them? Prison-free funds, which I think is a very interesting one for the moment that we're currently in, looks at whether or not companies are involved with private prisons, as well as any controversies along borders. The weapons-free funds is companies that are involved with military weapons, and tobacco-free funds is, I think, self-explanatory, although it doesn't just include the tobacco manufacturers. It also includes the entertainment industry. Is a movie production doing product placement of packs of cigarettes, for example? Or do they consider that not something that should be done? So these are the areas in which they do a rating of different mutual funds. And you can, after you click Get Started, you'll get to a page that lets you type in the name of the fund. Now, what I just do want to tell you is that they are currently in the process of upgrading their data set. So right now, it's, let's see, gun-free funds, I think, is available. Prison-free, weapons-free, and tobacco-free are available, but it won't at this present time provide information about fossil-free funds and deforestation-free funds. They've told me that it will be available in the coming weeks. So anyway, you type in the name of a mutual fund and you get a report card that looks like this. This is, some mutual fund that I had typed in. As you can see, they score pretty low across almost all categories. What is, to me, impressive about this tool is that you can actually dig further down into the information about why that mutual fund received that score. So, for example, if you were to click on fossil fuels, you would be given a list of what companies are in that mutual fund that has caused that mutual fund to get a D in this case. So it's very transparent and easy to access, easy to use, and it's free. Best thing since sliced bread, as they say. There's one other tool that is also available, and that is at Morningstar, at their website. Now, Morningstar has a long history of collecting all types of financial information. But in more recent years, they've now started collecting information and rankings relevant to sustainable investors. So as you can see here, their process is different. They do scores in different categories, and they compare a company to its peers. So, how does this company, for example, compare to other companies in its same industry category for carbon risk? Unlike the tool from As You Sow, you're not really able to dig too deep into the data, is because it uses a proprietary data tool. While As You Sow is using all publicly available information, so it can be a lot more transparent. All of this information is then used to do a ESG ranking, ESG standing for environmental, social, and governance. It's again one of the many names for sustainable investing. So in the case of this fund, as you can see, it gets three globes out of 5. So how can you do it yourself? Whether you manage your own investments or you work with an advisor, you can customize your investments based on what matters most to you in essentially 3 steps. The first step is deciding what matters to you. So, do you want to be investing in factory farms or companies that use regenerative agriculture? Renewable energy versus coal, libraries versus prisons, sustainable forests versus deforestation. So it's really thinking about what matters to you. If you want, and I will put this QR code up again at the end, you can go to this QR code and use a values questionnaire that we use with clients to help you understand what matters most to you. So, for example, these are some of the categories in which the users asked for additional input as to what matters to you the most. And then this is the kind of output from using that tool. So, maybe reducing toxic air pollution is not not important, but maybe it's a little less important than something, so you're going to score differently than this, than potentially than what you see here. But this is just to give you an idea of the types of issues that can be screened for. Once you know what matters to you, you can look at, a report card like what's appears on, As You Sow. So, if you're okay, say, with civilian firearms, but you're not okay with civilian firearms, but you don't want military weapons, then how you view this might be different. So the bottom line is you're taking what matters to you, your priorities, and linking it to your investments. Now, one thing that this tool actually also lets you do is it will let you identify what are all the mutual funds that have earned grade A in the fossil fuel category, for example. Same thing with the other categories. So rather than having to just figure out what fund it aligns with your values, you can actually see the grades. So again, another reason why this is such a valuable tool. So once you've identified some of the things that you might want to be investing in, the last step really is to go back and periodically check on the fund. Sometimes mutual funds will change their priorities. And so something that yesterday wasn't involved in for-profit prisons suddenly is. So, you want to see what are the stories that these funds can tell you about what they have done to work with companies. So, for example, this highlights about a mutual fund company pushing Walmart to change its gun policy and to fight for stronger gun safety. So these are the types of things that you can be looking at to make sure that what are your priorities, and are they constantly being met as changes are made in a portfolio. So for those of you who aren't doing this yourself, who are working with a financial advisor, my suggestion with you would be to clearly state what you expect in your investments, that you don't want to invest in companies involved in whatever, fill in the blank. Explain to them why. And you can share these resources that I've shared with you tonight. And most importantly, don't take no for an answer, because it can be done. It's just some advisors are more leery about doing it. So push. Remember, if you hire a financial advisor, they're working for you. So you can press them to do what you want. So use your power, essentially. So lastly, have to end with the disclaimer that's always required. As I promised, I'm going to leave up the QR code here and open it up to any questions.
Karen, thank you for that overview. I was not aware of those tools, so it's helpful to get an idea of places to evaluate mutual funds. I'm curious, so it sounds like the order you would normally go in is identify a fund that you're interested in and then check it on the report card. That's like the order. There isn't like a list of good mutual funds that you could, does that make
Right.
sense?
Well, if you want to benchmark what you may currently have investments in, you can, enter the name and see how it does on a report card. And if you see that it's not scoring well in the categories that matter to you, within at the As You Sow tool, you can find the mutual funds that have scored an A in that category. And actually, you can, unless they've changed it, you can sort the mutual funds that across multiple scores at multiple issue areas at once. So yeah, a decade or so ago, information like this wasn't available. And so, again, as I mentioned before, they are totally transparent, so you can see why they are giving a mutual fund a certain score. And they, cite their data sources.
And you can see like all funds that have an A score in X.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Oh, thank you. Good questions.
All right. Any other questions? I'm also going to just scroll through the images of you all. So if you are having trouble with the chat box, wave your hand and I can unmute you.
And while you're doing that, I see a question, which is with the standard advice to balance between equity and bonds, etc., is there likely to be a mix of funds that have good scores?
So, excuse me, if you're investing in bonds, so let me just backtrack for a minute and explain what a bond fund, mutual fund is. It, as the name suggests, invests in bonds, but it might be corporate bonds. It might be government bonds. It might be state bonds. It might be international bonds. In the case of a corporate bond fund, you would want to make sure that whatever companies you consider troublesome aren't included in that bond fund. Unfortunately, the screening tools are not as good for bond funds. The tool that we use does include both bonds and stocks, but the publicly available tools don't really do a good job of bond funds. At one point in time, when I worked at a small mutual fund company that did sustainable investing, the approach that we took was we didn't invest in government bonds because government bonds can be used for things that's like weapons. So therefore, we stayed away from those as well as various corporate bonds. So, but right, the universe of investables isn't just stocks. There's also bonds. And I hope that addressed your question. And if it didn't, please let me know.
Well, thank you. Anyone else have any
I
questions?
saw something else pop up.
I see another one, which is do AYS or Morningstar provide information on the benchmark fund, like the pair you used as an example, that resembles a fund you choose to do? You have to do your own research.
Okay, so let me explain, step back for a moment and explain, what those two indices that I was tracking. They're not a mutual fund. They are a complex amalgamation of various companies. So you cannot invest in an index, but there are plenty of index funds that track a specific index. So you can look to find what index a mutual fund is tracking against. I know that the As You Sow tool does have a component that lets you look at the financial criteria. And so maybe that's in there. I'm not as sure about that. But otherwise, it means, going online to the mutual fund company and see if they're providing that information. Does that answer your question, I hope? Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Jason.
All right. Anybody else?
So I'm just curious, maybe I'll ask a question of you all. Has anybody ever tried to do this themselves? I see Jason. And anyone else? Would you be willing to share your experience, Jason? I'm sorry to be putting you on the spot, but
I can unmute you if you're okay with that, Jason. All right.
Thank you. Actually, I've followed the fund, several of the funds, index funds in Vanguard, but I haven't done it myself yet.
Okay.
So, are you? Is it not appropriate to ask you about Domini's adventures in this realm?
Well, you can ask. I have to though say I really haven't kept it up to date with Domini's funds. But is there a specific question that you have?
No.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming off of mute and sharing your perspectives. Since we have time, I'm going to explain too about what's the difference between, say, a Vanguard doing sustainable investing versus, Calvert, Domini, Green Century investments that solely do sustainable investing. The biggest difference is, besides what they're investing in, is also whether or not they're using the power of the purse. When you hold shares in a company, it makes you an owner, part owner of that company. And so what that means is that theoretically, if you were to send a letter to a company saying, I am concerned about whatever that might be, they're supposed to respond to you because you're a shareholder. If they don't respond to you, there's additional steps you can take that eventually leads to a ballot question that will appear at the annual meeting. And companies really hate to have shareholder ballot questions. So that's a good way to get them to the negotiating table. But those are the types of things that, Fidelity isn't going to do. They're going to do the screening part, but they're not going to do the shareholder advocacy part. So then the other is how does a mutual fund, because they are an owner in these companies, how do they vote when it comes to the company annual meetings? Are they voting in line with what matters to you, or are they doing what the board wants? So these are some of the things to also consider about where to look for your investments.
How would you know if they're doing that work or not?
Well, yeah, it's not as easy as some of the other stuff, but a mutual fund company somewhere on its website has to give you a report on how they voted on different ballot questions for a company. And, for some investment companies, it's very easy to find. And for others, it's not as easy. It gets more buried.
Great. We have a few questions came in. So from Jason, any suggestions for talking to one's employer to convince them to offer one or more ESG funds?
Unfortunately, by yourself, you're probably not going to be able to move the bar. But if there are enough people going to HR knocking on their door about the retirement funds, you may be able to. Also, if you work for a, mission-based type of organization, pointing out that what they're offering doesn't align with what the company believes in might get them to do something about it. I spoke to people who work at the Harvard Medical School. What they didn't know was that they have tobacco stocks in their retirement plan. It kind of goes against the grain for what doctors believe nowadays anyway. Decades ago, different story, but.
Thank you. Okay, so from Linda, do you advise about investing in green banks? How about investments like described here at superpowersforgood.com? There's a link in the chat there.
I'm not familiar with superpowers. What you say was superpowers.com?
It looks like climate project crowdfunding is what Linda's talking about. But we can unmute you, Linda, if you want.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that. But, another thing that I will throw out there is, to think about is where you do your banking. If you use a local community bank, their mission is to invest in the community, as opposed to if you bank with JP Morgan, Chase. They invest in everything, and there's going to be things like, they're going to have bonds that invest in coal or invest in coal companies, for example. So if the more you can stay local, the better.
Great. Linda, let me know if you want me to unmute you so you can describe that a little bit more. Okay, so from Andrew, I've never invested before. I'm only in my early 20s, and I know they say to invest early, but it seems very overwhelming to get started with.
Yes. And that's, there tends to be a lot of paralysis due to analysis. It's overwhelming. If you have investing options in your workplace, typically, a bunch of papers are thrown at you and it's kind of sink or swim. There's nobody, unfortunately, to ask questions of. And this is why actually a number of companies offer what's called target date funds in their retirement plan. What a target date fund does is it takes your age and assumes how many more years you have till you're going to retire. While you're still young, it's going to invest in more stocks because even though stocks are more volatile, you have the time to potentially make back any losses. As you get closer and closer to retirement, that balance is going to change and there's probably going to be more bond type investments than stocks. So even if you start out with something like that, I hear too many people say, I shoulda, woulda, coulda. Don't beat yourself up. Getting started now is better than not getting started at all. And, I love the educational part of my job. And so, I'm happy to, talk to you, Andrew. The other thing, too, that I should mention, if you want, and this again, free, no strings attached, if you're interested in baselining what mutual funds you might currently be invested in, what we can do is you take that questionnaire, the QR code that I showed. There's a link on the homepage for our Green Future Wealth Management. Take that quiz. That will give us your priorities. We have a way for you to securely upload information about your investments, and we can benchmark it and see where you're at.
Thank you for that offer, Karen.
Yeah. Okay, so Jason suggests that folks might want to know how to move funds from an investment firm to one that is more ESG friendly.
It actually happens behind the scenes. You don't have to do anything, essentially. I'm assuming, Jason, that you're talking about from the advisor standpoint. So if you find an advisor that you want to work with versus who you've been working with, that your new advisor takes care of getting all the funds moved over. So it's an easy process. If you wanted to call your current advisor and tell them I'm leaving, fine. But if you don't have to. They'll eventually see that your money's flowing out. But you can avoid having to have that confrontation if you want, or discussion.
So Michaela asks, are there any learning apps that, movement of my questions. Here we go. Are there any learning apps that you would recommend to use in order to learn more about how to invest and investigate investing?
Okay. A really good website, and I have to remember the name of it. It's called Investopedia. I'll type this in the chat. It is essentially the encyclopedia of the investment world. Free resource. You can type in a term and it will give you the definition, but they also will walk you. They have information on there as what's a mutual fund, what's a stock, what's a bond, and they'll walk you through all of that. So it's a good place for a beginner, or to be totally honest, there's times where I'm not sure about a term and I use it. So.
Nice. Thank you, Karen. I'm not seeing that in the everyone chat. Oh, there we go.
Because I didn't hit send. We were early on tonight talking about how even after all these years of using Zoom, we still get mixed up about things.
I'm curious what you would say, like, to someone who lives, in Vermont who wants to start investing, because I think a lot of us, the first thing we think of are the big names, like Vanguard. Everyone's heard of Vanguard. So I'll just call it Vanguard,
Mm-hmm.
What else would you do?
Well, so there's a couple of ways that, from a personal standpoint that you can invest. You can open a account at Vanguard. That doesn't mean that you have to buy Vanguard funds. They'll offer funds from multiple fund families. Same thing, Schwab or Fidelity. And so that's one option. The other option is you can actually go to like Domini Impact Investments website and open an account. And so those kinds of models are essentially self-service, so to speak.
Domini being like a more environmentally focused.
Right. They're one of the investment companies that solely does sustainable investing. Oh, I like this, that you can sign up for emails from Investopedia to feed you information.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. That's a great tip.
Yeah.
All right. Well, if there aren't any other questions, thank you so much, Karen. That was a lot of great information and discussion, and I learned a lot.
Well, thank you so much for having me. As I said from the very beginning, this is my favorite subject, and sometimes I have to pull back to stop talking about it.
Thank
So
you.
if I went overboard with stuff, thanks. Oh, thank you for this conversation. Then I'm sorry. If you want to talk some more, feel free to reach out.
I learned some good things.
Yep. All right. Thanks. Good night, everybody.
Thank you, Karen.
Good night.